All right, hey, in this video, we are going to be talking about the Lord's Day on the Lord's Day, so let's get right to it. Joining me is Jeremiah Wood, and we are going to be talking about the Lord's Day. And I know some of you are interested in this study, and I know that some of you are wondering what our source material is, and I'm going to show you right now. It's this book right here, The Lord's Day by Joseph Pipa Jr., and he goes through the whole subject of Christians and the Lord's Day, and that's what we're going to be working through. So if you want to go ahead and head over to Amazon and order your paperback, I think it's like $12 on Amazon, something like that. It's not too terribly expensive, but if you want to keep up with us and work through this, I don't know how long it's going to take us to work through this. We're not looking to go through this subject as quickly as we can. We are just looking to go through it as solidly as we can. We want to make sure we're covering all of the topics here that's in the book. So if you want to buy it and start reading ahead and study on your own, you're welcome to that. Maybe you can come to these Lord's Days broadcasts on the Lord's Day where I think that's a good way to spend the Lord's Day, is to talk about the Lord's Day.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to be doing here for the next, I don't know how many weeks. It can go on 70 weeks. It can go on, well, that sounds eerily prophetic, doesn't it? The 70 weeks.
It certainly does.
That was unintentional, but it could go on 70 weeks. It can go on 40 weeks, which that's another number that sounds really prophetic too. Unintentional. So anyway, we don't know how long this study is going to take, but we're going to be doing this every Lord's Day until we get through, Lord willing, get through the entirety of this book here. So thank you so much for joining me. Since some of you are new, go ahead and hit that share button and let your friends know that my friend Jeremiah Wood and myself, we're going to be starting this discussion. So I have not read this book all the way through, and so this is going to be really interesting. So do you have any opening thoughts that you want to share first, or?
Well, I should actually start by saying I haven't always held to this conviction. As a matter of fact, prior to about 5 years ago, I had no conviction concerning the Lord's Day or what that entailed. I was a new Presbyterian, didn't really know much about it, didn't really think about it, but it was actually not just this book, but a book written by Walter Chantry, who actually wrote an endorsement of this book titled "Call the Sabbath a Delight." But with that, I think that what we are aiming to do is show people how that day, that commandment, the fourth commandment, is a delight for us as Christians, if we're really observing it, and not as a list of do nots, but more of what we get to do.
Right. Well, you just mentioned Walter J. Chantry, and his endorsement's actually on the very front of this book, and I'm just going to read it now for everybody. Every believer will find an abundance of practical direction for keeping the Lord's Day in our modern world. And that's kind of what we need, is because I think that's something that's changed as a society. That is observable change, when we had the blue laws. And so now we see where we're just kind of getting away from some of that stuff. And so, but before we get into the book, I want to let some of our listeners know this is not going to deal with some of the objections that you normally get when this topic comes up, such as Romans 13, Galatians 4, and Colossians 2. Those are the common objections. Well, don't let anyone judge you regarding a Sabbath day. But yet, that verse in that interpretation, the way they're using that verse cuts both ways, doesn't it? And it seems like we're the ones judged in regards to the Lord's Day and the Sabbath. But anyway, just in this episode, just to let you know what's coming ahead, we're not going to be dealing with those common objections. We're just going to be laying a foundation and a starting point, and I think we have an excellent starting point. And basically, the two questions we're going to be looking at is, what are the promises for those Christians keeping the Lord's Day, and does that promise still apply? And so I'm going to read a little story here from the very beginning of the book, and I'm going to actually bring it up on the screen because I found an EPUB version of this book, so which I was not able to find on Amazon. But let's go ahead and look at this story here. And it says it's a day for blessing. This is the story that opens up this book, and I think it's a great story to open up our study. And the story is called A Day for Blessing. Once there was a great king who built a splendid city. In the middle of the city, the king designed a delightful park which was laid out with ponds, fountains, and springs, magnificent trees from all over the world, gorgeous aromatic plants, inviting stretches of lawn, pathways and benches where people and families might walk and sit together, and a spacious amphitheater for public meetings. Weekly, the king met with his subjects in the park. His people delighted in the time with him and one another. One day, the king had to go away. In his absence, the rulers he left in charge began to let the park run down. Although they still held civic events at the amphitheater, these rulers had little interest in the park. They did not truly have in mind the king's interests. Soon the park was overrun with weeds. The trees were not pruned, the exotic plants died, and the pools of water stagnated. The park was in ruins. After a time, a new group of rulers came into authority in the city. They were genuinely concerned about the park and began to restore it to its former beauty. They pulled out all the weeds, replanted all the gardens, pruned the trees, repaired the pathways and the benches, and opened the streams so that fresh water again flowed through the park. These rulers, however, were fearful that the park once again would fall into disrepair. In order to protect the park, they made it a memorial to the king, rather like a museum. They continued to hold meetings at the amphitheater, but they put a fence around the park's border and along the pathways, so people could look at the beautiful sights in the park, but could not actually use it. Then one day, quite unexpectedly, the king's son came into the city. One of the first things that he did was to tear down the fence. He exclaimed to the rulers, "Enough of this! This park was built for the people of the city to remember my father and enjoy, but you have kept them out of the park." So after removing all of the fences, he invited the people to come and meet with him and one another in the park. Because the king and his son are still occupied throughout their great kingdom, they have appointed leaders in the city. Regrettably, of late, these leaders once again have allowed the park to become unkempt and trampled down. Again, weeds overrun it. The trees are not pruned, and the ponds have become stagnant. Because it has lost much of its charming beauty, people no longer come to it. Admittedly, they have kept the amphitheater in good repair and continue public meetings, but increasingly the people are losing interest. The park is so unattractive that they see no need to go there at all. Recently, developers, seeing the land unused, have begun seeking to put up an amusement park. The Historical Society is opposing them, wanting instead to restore the park and preserve it for the sake of tradition. But there is a third group who wants to restore it to its original purposes. To make matters more confusing, all parties are claiming to act on behalf of the interests of the king and his son. Meanwhile, as you might imagine, the king's subjects are thoroughly confused. So that's the story right there. That's kind of what's going on. Is what is the function of the Lord's Day and how people are approaching it. And so what this author's interest is to see the park restored to its original purposes. And I think that's where we're going to get a lot of confusion. Why do you think, Jeremiah, why do you think people are opposed to the idea of the Lord's Day? What do you think the friction is?
Well, to be very frank, and if I can even speak for myself, when I was first met with this conviction, I was so accustomed to the entire week belonging to me that the Lord's Day really was something that was for, if nothing else, church attendance, but the rest of the day was mine. And of course, a conviction that goes along with that. And a big part of even my background was I was a dispensationalist. And a dispensationalist would look at this particular commandment, the fourth commandment, and they would say, this is ceremonial in nature. It's not moral, and it's not reciprocated in the New Testament. Therefore, because it's entirely outward, it's something that belongs to the old dispensation and not to us today as Christians.
Wow. And I would agree that is kind of the prevailing thought. And that's kind of a change in church culture that we've seen in the past, I want to say 60, 70 years. That's observable. This is not something you have that we're making up or anything. But let's go to the text really quick to kind of get your interest in the Lord's Day and why we're even discussing this, because there is a promise here, and the promise comes from Isaiah 58, starting at verse 13 and through verse 14. Do you have the text in front of you by chance, Jeremiah?
Let me pull it up here.
Okay,
Richard. Give me just one moment.
All right. We'll wait for just a moment while he pulls up the text, and Isaiah 58 verse 13 and 14, because that's the promise that we're going to be looking at. And
okay.
Yeah. If you want to go ahead and read that for me.
Sure. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father. For the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it.
Wow. Those are some very strong promises there. Now, we're going to get to whether or not these promises still apply. That's going to come a little later, but let's just put that aside for a moment, and let's try to understand what this is saying. God is telling us if we turn away our foot. Now, I've got the New King James Version up. Let me switch over to ESV. If you turn your foot or turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable. If you honor it, not going your own ways, then you shall take delight in the Lord. And this is the part that I really like in this promise here. I will make you ride on the heights of the earth. That is actually a huge promise, to be riding on the heights of the earth. And then we're being fed with the heritage of Jacob, your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So those are two very, very big points. And again, I said, we'll look and see if this still applies here. We'll make a case for that in just a moment. But let's focus on the language there. Ride on the heights of the earth. That's victory language. That is, that's dominating language. That's language we want. And it actually comes from Deuteronomy chapter 32. I'm going to bring that up so we can read that. Deuteronomy 32, verses 12 through 13. And it says, the Lord alone guided him. No foreign god was with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and he ate the produce of the field. So that riding on the high place, that's not new to Isaiah. That's from the law. And so... so there's that. And then we also have language earlier in Isaiah 33, verse 16, and we're going to bounce over there really quick. Um, and we're about to get to the point where we're going to make a case for this being in the New Testament for the church anyway. Isaiah 33 verse 16, it says, "He will dwell on the heights. His place of defense will be the fortresses of rocks. His bread will be given to him. His water will be sure." So this is victory language. This is good language. This is language that we would want as Christians to be ascribed to us. So this is a very big promise here that we're seeing in Isaiah 58 verses 13 and 14. And then of course we go to Romans 8:37 and we get other language like we are more than conquerors, and we can tie that to this promise. But the real question, and I know everybody's wanting to know, and this is the main point of the episode, is does this promise still apply? Does this promise still apply? Do you have anything regarding that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, we have to remember that Isaiah is one of these very profound books of the Bible, of the New Testament, that actually points to Christ, his work, and the church. And so a lot of this language that is used is prophetic, and not only prophetic in nature, but it points to the New Testament church, how we fit into that New Testament church, and the blessings we can enjoy as part of that New Testament church.
Mm-hmm. And the bedrock of all that, and everybody knows Isaiah 53. And the suffering servant, and I'm just gonna bring that up briefly, and we're gonna kind of cut through this really quick. "Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" And then we see down here verse 4, "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions, and he was crushed for our iniquities." And so this is obviously Isaiah 53. We know, and we have no problems taking Isaiah 53 and saying that is definitely for the New Testament. That is the inauguration of the New Testament. That is our benefit that we see. And so, you could say, well, Isaiah 53 and Isaiah 58, that's kind of far apart. You're just kind of throwing, you're cherry picking, when it comes to this subject of the Lord's Day. But I think we've got some evidence here, and I'm just going to go right on over into the next chapter. Isaiah 54, "Sing, O barren one who did not bear, break forth into singing and cry aloud, Eve, or you who have not been in labor, for the children of the desolate one will be more than the children of her who is married, says the Lord. Enlarge the place of your tent, and let the curtains of your habitations be stretched out. Do not hold back, lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes. For you will be spread abroad to the right and to the left, and your offspring will possess the nations and will people the desolate cities." So that, and verse 3 right there, verse 2 and 3, that's New Testament language. Well, how is it? Well, the gospel goes into all the world. It's left the Gentiles. So this is right here. This is New Testament language here. Mm-hmm. And then you could say, okay, well, you just got 53, 54 and chapter 58. Well, let's just go to the next chapter, shall we? Let's go let's go to Isaiah 55. "Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come and buy wine and milk without money and without price." And so this is, and then you go down to verse 3, "Incline your ear and come to me, hear that your soul may live. And I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast sure love for David." So we see this is still New Testament language here in Isaiah 55. Okay. So so far I've got Isaiah 53, Isaiah 54, Isaiah 55, and Isaiah 58.
Well, and even in Isaiah 55, this is one of the classic texts that points to the grace that we enjoy being in that covenant of grace.
Right.
On this side of Christ, we can see everything's been paid for. We get to come and we get to enjoy these blessings without money and without price. Mm-hmm. So we have no problem adopting this text for ourselves. Mm-hmm. But why are we so reluctant to uh, adopt Isaiah 58 and its blessings for us as well?
Right. Well, I think I'm gonna make one more case here in the very next chapter, Isaiah 56. And Isaiah 56, I think this one's going to really put the nail in the coffin for you. Whether or not Isaiah 58 verses 13 and 14 applies to the New Testament church, I think this one is going to really drive it home. And we're going to start at verse 2 in Isaiah 56. It says, "Blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who holds it fast, who keeps the Sabbath, not profaning it, and keeps his hand from doing any evil." Well, Richard, how does that have anything to do? Well, hang on. We got a few more verses, right, Jeremiah?
That's right.
All right, so we're going to go to verse 3. "Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, the Lord will surely separate me from his people. And let not the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. For thus says the Lord, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose the things that please me and hold fast my covenant, I will give in my house and within my walls a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off." Well, I think that's some pretty strong evidence, but, well, some people may not know why that's such strong evidence. In verse 4, particularly, the language is to eunuchs who keep my Sabbath. Now, you and I probably know why that's pretty stellar, as Christians to read. But I'm gonna go.
As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
I mean, so one of the things that Dr. Pipa actually points out in his book is that eunuchs were not really allowed this sort of honor. As a matter of fact, they couldn't even worship in the temple. And there's a lot of significance here. I mean, now, going over to Acts chapter 8, we have the deacon Philip being commanded by the Holy Spirit to go out into a desert place to share the gospel with an Ethiopian eunuch. And what is the text, by the way, that this particular Ethiopian eunuch is reading through? It's the scroll of Isaiah. Inevitably, so the same eunuch is going to come here to chapter 50. Well, he's going to read all the way through the scroll of Isaiah, and he's going to come to this place. I mean, think about the significance of God taking Philip, who is already overwhelmed in the mission field in Samaria, to bring the gospel message to this eunuch reading this particular text.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It has momentous New Testament importance.
Yep.
If not the fact that this particular eunuch was actually fulfilling this very same prophecy.
Absolutely. So now just to kind of recap just really quick, we're talking about the Old Covenant. These are people that know the law. They know Deuteronomy 32 verses 12 and 13. That's where where they're prohibited from even joining the assembly. And so this kind of language here, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, that was pretty bizarre language to be hearing coming from a prophet. And so that language right there is indication that these promises around the Sabbath. Now, we have not made the case that it still applies. We're just saying that text in Isaiah 58, 13 and 14 is definitely for the church. And, you may have your objections regarding the Lord's Day and how it's to be practiced. We will get to that in a future episode. But I just want to basically point you to the key text of this episode is Isaiah 58, verse 13 and 14. That is a promise for the church that we get to enjoy. And we're going to definitely continue on in that. Did you have any other remarks that you wanted to make, Jeremiah, on this?
I think I've made a pretty good point.
I think you did too. I mean, in Acts chapter 8, he's reading this text right here, so he knows he's reading something that was a big deal to him. And so he had that. Man, what a blessing that is. What a blessing that is. Well, I think, I want to keep these Lord's Day episodes really short, so people can just kind of digest them and not be distracted from their other Lord's Day obligations and duties and privileges, such as spending time with their family. But I think that right there, Isaiah 56 verse 4, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, that is definitely pointing to the New Testament. That is not Old Testament. So
that's right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me, Jeremiah. I appreciated it. And I look forward to doing several more. But again, the book that we're doing here is The Lord's Day by Joseph Pipa. If you want to get your copy, you can have it ready by next weekend. And we're just going to continue to work through this book together with my friend Jeremiah. And we're going to just work through the whole book and hopefully we can bring this to you guys. And even if you don't want to purchase your copy, we're essentially going to cover, I want to say 75% maybe of the material that's in the book. But we're not going to be able to cover everything. So,
sure.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see you next week, and we'll see all you guys next week as well. So thank you so much.
Happy Lord's Day.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to get out there and I'm going to enjoy the Lord's Day today. And so you have a blessed Lord's Day as well, my brother.
Thank you,
we will see you guys next time. And as always, Soli Deo Gloria.